Major General Robert Keaton had seen it all for nearly 30 years in uniform, from the dust-choked streets of Fallujah to the frozen peaks of Afghanistan. Nothing surprised him anymore. But that afternoon, inside the armory of Redemption Base in western Iraq, a single, almost invisible detail made him stop in the middle of the corridor. He was doing what he always did, a routine inspection. Steady steps, clipboard in hand, followed closely by Lieutenant Colonel Davis, his aide officer. The air inside the armory carried its familiar mix: the smell of gun oil, the tang of metal, the soft scrape of cleaning cloths, the click of bolts being cycled. It was just another afternoon to Keaton, one more inspection among the thousands he had done, until he saw her. In the farthest corner of the room, where the light barely touched the gun racks, a Marine sat silently, carefully cleaning a massive Barrett M107A1 rifle. The weapon weighed nearly 30 pounds and was designed to pierce steel over a mile away. But it looked almost delicate in her hands, like a handcrafted instrument that demanded absolute precision. Every motion she made was measured, steady, and gentle. No wasted sound, no excess expression. It is as if, at that moment, the outside world simply ceased to exist. Keaton stopped and glanced at her name tag. Monroe. Gunnery Sergeant Riley Monroe. He had seen hundreds of soldiers doing the same job, but something about her drew his attention. The way she sat still, the slow, reverent rhythm of her hands as they touched every part of the rifle. He was about to move on until his eyes caught something small on her sleeve. A silver badge, old and simple. Nothing flashy. Not the kind of insignia that would usually catch a general's attention. But the engraving on it made his blood stop cold. 3,200 meter confirmed kill. 3,200 meters. Keaton frowned slightly. He reread it slowly, making sure he wasn't mistaken. 3,200 meters. That's over 2 miles. Throughout his career, he'd worked with the best snipers, Rangers, Delta, SEALs. But he had a badge, insignificant in size, but carrying an impossible number. Finally, he exhaled softly, murmuring to himself, "A soldier like that. Who is she?" He didn't yet know that this single question would take him further than he ever imagined, into a world of silent warriors, where skill, intellect, and discipline converge to create what most call impossible. After the general walked a few steps away, the atmosphere in the armory returned to its usual rhythm. The sound of cloth wiping metal, the faint clink of steel, the dry hum of the air conditioner. But in that far corner, where the pale yellow glow of the fluorescent lamp reached down to the gray concrete floor, Riley Monroe still sat there, motionless as a statue. She was performing a ritual no one else could fully comprehend. Because to Riley, cleaning the Barrett wasn't just maintenance. It was a conversation. She disassembled each component with a gentleness that felt almost alive. Every screw, every joint, every sliding surface of the bolt. Each part was laid neatly on a white cloth, arranged with precision bordering on obsession. She didn't need to look. Her hands knew where everything belonged. She didn't count, but somehow she always knew how many parts remained to inspect. It might look like a habit to others, but it was a silent oath to Riley. Because on the battlefield, she had learned one truth. If you want the bullet to find the enemy's heart, you must first keep your own heart still. And in that moment, within the cold, gun oil-scented room, Her heart was so still she could almost hear the metal breathing. She had performed this ritual for 8 months, every day since being assigned to Redemption Base. 3 hours daily. Disassemble, clean, oil, check barrel curvature, bolt smoothness, stock balance. People said she was obsessed. She only smiled. Because to Riley it wasn't an obsession. It was respect. To her, the Barrett wasn't a weapon, but a teammate. A silent companion who understood the language of absolute precision. Each time she cleaned the rifle, memories surfaced. The mountains of Afghanistan, the borders of Syria, the long nights in northern Iraq. Only 2 sounds existed in those places, the heartbeat and the trigger. She had lived long enough to understand that life and death are separated by a single, uneven breath in the world of snipers. That's why she focused on every detail, every grain of dust, every scratch in the metal. When the moment born of fear, nor of indifference, but of someone who had faced too many explosions and chosen to live through quiet instead. He turned away, yet the question still echoed in his mind. Who is she? And what really happened at 3,200 meters? He didn't yet know that this question would draw him deep into the world of those known as ghosts on the battlefield, where a single misplaced breath could alter the entire history of a mission. The next morning, General Keaton couldn't shake the thought of that soldier. All night, his mind returned to the number engraved on that tiny silver badge. 3,200 meters. It wasn't just a distance. It was a challenge to everything he knew. Ballistics, physics, and the limits of the human body. And the one who had surpassed those limits was just a young woman about the same age as his daughter. Keaton was already back at the armory when the first sunlight broke across the Iraqi sandfields. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Davis walked beside him, holding a tablet displaying personnel data. "I want to see Sergeant Monroe's file," Keaton said. Davis tapped quickly, the bluish light reflecting on his face. "Sir, most of her file is encrypted. Several sections are marked top secret. Some unit codes listed here aren't part of any publicly known Marine Corps structure." Keaton frowned. "Open whatever you can." A few seconds later, lines of information appeared, short but enough to make him furrow his brow again. Riley Monroe, born in Arizona, enlisted in Arizona. Enlisted at age 19. Graduated from the Marine Corps Sniper School with the highest score in its training history. Davis continued reading, his voice slowing down. She completed advanced training in long-range ballistics, military meteorology, and trajectory computation. Certified in cooperative operations with Delta Force. There are also several deployments with no listed location, only noted as mission cleared by SOCOM. Keaton fell silent. He looked across the room. Riley was still in the far corner, sitting in the same posture, cleaning the Barrett as if nothing had changed. "Sergeant Monroe," Keaton called out, his tone calm but carrying the full weight of authority. She looked up. "Yes, sir." "I want to understand. How can a human being shoot accurately at 3,200 meters? Do you know how that's possible?" Riley set the bolt aside, wiped her hands with a cloth, then sat upright. Her voice was steady, clear, filled with perfect respect, yet entirely unshaken. "Sir, at that..." Steadier than the planet itself. Keaton stared at her, speechless. In that voice he heard more than knowledge, He heard experience. She didn't speak like someone who had studied it. She spoke like someone who had lived it, who had seen her bullet slice through air, through wind, through time itself, and touch the target in utter silence. Davis glanced at Keaton, murmuring, "Sir," hearing her talk, "I think I'm listening to a physicist, not a sniper." Keaton nodded slightly. "No," he replied quietly, eyes never leaving Riley. "She's not just a marksman. She's living proof that intellect and skill can outpace even theory." He paused for a few seconds, then spoke again, almost to himself. "If what you're saying is true, Monroe, then the world has never truly understood what humans are capable of." Riley smiled faintly, a smile so small it almost wasn't there, but enough to show she understood. "Sir," she said, "sometimes what limits us isn't the range of the rifle, but the range of our own vision." 2 mornings later, the Iraqi desert lay under a thin veil of mist. The first rays of sunlight swept across the endless sand, casting a pale golden hue over the world. At the extended firing range of Redemption Base, rows of soldiers and senior officers stood along the observation line. No one spoke much. They were simply waiting to witness what Major General Robert Keaton had ordered: a live fire test by the female sniper who bore the badge 3,200-meter confirmed kill. Riley Monroe arrived early. She carried her Barrett M107A1, a bag of meteorological instruments, a handheld ballistic computer, and several heavy boxes of 50 BMG rounds. Every step she took was light, firm, and calm, without a trace of arrogance or the urge to prove herself. Lieutenant Colonel Davis, standing beside Keaton, whispered, "Sir, the maximum range here is only 1,200 meters. We can't set up a 3,200-meter line inside the base." Keaton nodded. "That's fine, I just want to see what she meant by the patience of a bullet." Riley quietly set her bag down, unzipped it, and took out her equipment. She checked the barrel, quickly wiped it with a dry cloth, attached the optical scope, and adjusted for elevation and windage. Every movement had rhythm, steady, precise, unhurried. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "A bullet never makes a mistake, unless the shooter rushes." A light breeze carried a swirl of golden dust around the rifle's muzzle. Riley switched on her meteorological device and scanned the data. Wind 3.2 meters per second southeast direction. The temperature is 31 degrees. Air density 1.172. Pressure stable. Hearing her, Keaton couldn't hide his astonishment. She processed the information like a computer. When everything was ready, she lay down in position. The rifle stock rested lightly against her right shoulder, her body flat against the earth. Her left hand supported the scope, steady and firm. Her right hand pulled the bolt back. Click. "Where's the target?" she asked. An observer replied, "Steel plate, 1,200 meters, centered under the white flag frame." Riley. Harsh sunlight. At the exact center of the thick steel plate was a small, perfect hole, no larger than a pencil tip. He lowered the binoculars, silent for a long moment. "You just put a bullet into the heart of steel from 1.5 kilometers away," he murmured. Riley gave a slight nod. "Sir, it's just a principle. Greater distances only change the bullet's flight time and the shooter's patience." Keaton looked at her, a faint, almost incredulous smile tugging at his lips. "And at 3,200 meters, she replied quietly. "When the wind is still, the earth turns in your favor, and the shooter's heart doesn't tremble. Nothing is impossible." Her words fell into silence. No one laughed, no one doubted anymore. They simply stood there, watching the young woman in her faded uniform pack up her gear, wipe down her rifle, and move with the same calm as before. as if she hadn't just redefined the limits of human precision. As she walked from the range, General Keaton remained still, watching her go. In the blistering desert light, her figure looked small, yet every step carried the weight of something he had never seen in anyone else before. The silence of someone who had seen too far and still chosen humility. A week after the live fire test, General Keaton still couldn't shake the image of Riley Monroe lying perfectly still on the ground, silent as stone yet precise as a machine. He had witnessed hundreds of skill demonstrations throughout his career, but none had ever made him feel so small. Since that day, Keaton kept asking himself, how far can a person go if they treat silence as their ally? That question led him to the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC headquarters, where the files for top-secret, eyes-only missions were stored. It took him nearly a week to obtain authorization to access Riley Monroe's file. Layer after layer of security, each encrypted with strings of code accessible only to officers of general rank. When the screen finally lit up, the first line appeared. Operation Silent Reach, Northern Iraq. Confirmed mission clearance. JSOC, SOCOM. Below it were short, cold, emotionless reports. Mission: rescue 12 hostages held inside a fortified concrete structure. Threat: 3 hostile combatants armed with rifles and explosives. Distance between target and Special Operations Unit: 3,200 meters. Chance of infiltration: none. The following line made Keaton sit upright. Tactical solution: deploy extreme long-range fire support. Shooter: Gunnery Sergeant Riley Monroe, USMC. Below was the field commander's brief after-action report. Monroe spent 4 hours analyzing terrain, measuring wind velocity, calculating air layer temperatures, and adjusting firing angles. When optimal conditions were reached, she fired. 3 shots, 3 confirmed kills, no hostage casualties. Mission completed within 11 minutes of target acquisition. Keaton read every word slowly. He pictured it. A woman lying in the cold desert wind, waiting 4 hours to fire just 3 bullets. No cheering crowds. No medals dangling in front of cameras. Only absolute precision, faith in mathematics, breath control, and silence. At the bottom of the report, the final note read, Mission review, success, only activated when failure is no longer an option. Keaton was silent. In his mind, the fragments began to fall into place. The badge, the calm, the way she bowed her head when answering, without pride, without fear. He spoke softly, each word weighted. Someone like her doesn't need a title. She is the title. Whitmore nodded. We call them the quiet marksmen. No one knows their real names, but every time they act, dozens of lives are saved. Keaton closed his eyes, a rare feeling of reverence rising in his chest. He realized that soldiers like Riley didn't shoot to be remembered, nor kill to be glorified. They simply did what had to be done, silently, precisely, without a single misstep. 1 bullet, 3 lives taken, 12 lives saved. And the world would never know her name. But to General Robert Keaton, that alone was enough to call her a legend. 6 months later, Redemption Base remained the same. The faded concrete walls, the sound of Apache helicopters lifting off through the dusty dawn, and rows of flags fluttering in the desert wind. But one thing had changed: how Major General Robert Keaton saw the world. Since the day he read Riley Monroe's file, he no longer saw soldiers as numbers in a report. He had come to understand that among the endless noise of war, some choose silence. And that silence sometimes echoes farther than any gunfire ever could. That night, an emergency meeting was held inside the command room. An armed terrorist group had seized an Allied facility in the mountains north of Mosul, taking multiple U.S. personnel and military advisors hostage. The terrain was complex. There was no safe approach. "All access routes are blocked," an officer reported. "If we advance, they'll execute the hostages before we arrive." Keaton studied the satellite map on the screen. He noticed one thing. Between 2,900 and 3,100 meters, there was a ridge high enough to overlook the entire compound. He didn't need to speak aloud. Brigadier General Karen Whitmore, commander of the Silent Tide program, rose from her seat before he even opened his mouth. "I know who you're thinking of, General." Keaton nodded slightly. "Call her in." 3 hours later, a Black Hawk touched down in the darkness. Riley Monroe stepped out, lean, composed, dressed in sand-colored tactical gear, the lower half of her face hidden behind a black scarf. No one saluted. No one introduced her. People like her didn't need introductions. She gave a simple nod toward Keaton. "What's the situation, sir?" "Target's at an elevation of 3,000 meters. Hostages inside. Winds shifting east-northeast. You think you can do it?" Riley raised her binoculars, her voice calm and confident. "I'll need 4 hours. And absolute silence." 8:10 a.m. Temperature, 18 degrees Celsius. Riley lay prone atop the mountain ridge, her Barrett M107A1 mounted on a stabilizing stand, her eye fixed through the scope. Beside her, a small digital screen continuously displayed wind and humidity readings. Every 30 seconds, forces stormed the building, neutralized all hostiles. Not a single hostage was harmed. When Keaton looked back at the monitor, Riley still hadn't moved. She was peering through the scope, not to find another target, but to ensure the wind had stopped. By dawn, the operation was officially marked as a flawless success. No press conference, no medals, no speeches. Only one short entry recorded in the classified log. Operation Whisperlight. Mission accomplished. No casualties. When Keaton met Riley later that morning in the armory, she was cleaning her Barrett, just as she always did. He stopped, watching quietly for a long moment before speaking. "I saw everything. The shot last night, and what you did 6 months ago. Riley, how many people have you saved?" She looked up, smiling faintly. "I don't count, sir. I only count the rounds I have left." Keaton nodded, eyes glistening slightly. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "In war, everyone fears the sound of gunfire. But sometimes, the silence that keeps the world safe." Riley replied, her voice soft yet unwavering. "Sir, silence isn't hiding. It's just another way to protect." Her words left Keaton standing there motionless for a long time. He felt he had learned something from a subordinate for the first time in years. And from that day forward, whenever he passed the armory, he would pause for a few seconds to see the silhouette of a quiet soldier wiping down her Barrett 50, and to remember, sometimes, those who make the most significant difference, these are the ones the world rarely sees. Years later, the war was long over. The desert fields where gunfire once echoed now carried only the sound of wind brushing through faded flags. Redemption Base still stood, a silent monument of time. Inside a small hall near the main gate was a display area titled Silent Valor. The Guardians in the Shadows. Within it, among dozens of artifacts, stood a simple glass case. Inside the case rested a Barrett M107A1, polished to a mirror shine. Beneath it, a small plaque bore only a few lines. Weapon of Gunnery Sergeant Riley Monroe, U.S. Marine Corps Scout Sniper. Multiple operations. Classified records. Noted for confirmed shot at 3,200 meters. No portrait, no date of birth, no date of death. Only one item lay beside the rifle. A silver badge engraved with the words that had once made General Keaton stop in his tracks years ago. 3,200-meter confirmed kill. Now retired Robert Keaton, his hair completely white, strolled into the exhibit. He stood before the glass for a long time, one hand resting lightly on the surface, as if touching a memory. Before him was no longer a weapon, but a symbol of silence, of duty, of courage that never needed applause. He spoke softly, almost to himself. People often believe that strength lies in the noise of explosions. But some bullets exist only to keep the world quiet for one more day. A young lieutenant passed by, recognized him, and offered a respectful salute. "Sir, did you know her?" Keaton smiled faintly. "No, Lieutenant. I never truly knew her. I was just fortunate enough to witness someone who turned silence into the most powerful weapon on Earth." He looked one last time. In the dim light of the room, the glass reflected his aged face, and behind it, the faint image of a young woman, calm and focused, leaning over her rifle. Just like that afternoon, so chapters of history